I didn't want him dead, Mother. I wanted him to know what it felt like. To watch someone you love disappear before you're ready to let them go.
I didn't want him dead, Mother. My daughter said it so calmly that for a second I thought I'd heard her wrong. We were sitting across from each other at her kitchen table. A mug of tea sat between her hands. She looked down at it for a moment, running her thumb slowly along the rim. Then she looked back at me. I wanted him to know what it felt like, she said. Her voice never rose, not once. To watch someone you love disappear before you're ready to let them go. I stared at her. My daughter. The little girl I had raised. The woman I thought I knew better than anyone. And sitting there in that quiet kitchen, I realized there were 7 years of her life I didn't understand at all. 3 weeks earlier, October, a private cemetery at the edge of the city. Gray sky, white roses, 200 people dressed in black. And I was standing beside my husband's grave, holding a single white rose in my hand. 35 years of marriage, 35 years of loving Raymond Hargrove, and in less than 10 seconds, everything I believed about my family was about to come apart. The coffin began to lower. The string quartet played softly behind me. My son stood shoulder to shoulder nearby. Marcus, Damon, Troy. Celeste stood closer to me than any of them, pressing a white handkerchief to her eyes. She looked heartbroken. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. The funeral was almost over. The phone buzzed again. I glanced down and froze. Raymond's name, Raymond's photograph, the man I was burying that morning. Yet there he was on my screen, not calling, texting. 5 words. 5 words that turned a funeral into the beginning of something I never saw coming. The man in the coffin isn't me. I looked at the casket. I looked at my children. Then I looked back at the message. Nobody knew what I had just read. Nobody knew my world had changed, and nobody knew that before this was over, I was going to learn the truth about every person standing beside that grave. I thought I was burying my husband. I had no idea I was about to unbury the truth about everyone I loved. My name is Diane Hargrove. I am 59 years old. I have been a wife for 35 years and a mother for 41, and on the gray October morning I am about to tell you about, I thought I was the strongest woman in the room. I thought I had already lived through the worst day of my life. I was wrong about everything. The morning of Raymond Hargrove's funeral was the kind of October morning that didn't apologize for being gray. I had chosen everything myself, the white roses because they were his favorite, even though they had never been mine. The string quartet, the mahogany casket with brass fittings, the burial plot at the far end of the family section, closest to the old oak tree Raymond pointed out years ago during one of our walks. He told me, without a trace of sentimentality, that was where he wanted to be someday. I remembered, so I made sure every detail was exactly right. Nearly 200 people came, business associates, city officials, men Raymond had mentored, men he had competed against, people who respected him, people who feared him, people whose lives had crossed his in ways large and small over 40 years. Everyone wore black. Everyone spoke softly. Everyone believed they were attending the funeral of Raymond Hargrove. My son stood to my left. Marcus's jaw was so tight I could see the muscle working beneath the skin. Damon was red around the eyes, but after 42 years of being his mother, I knew the difference between grief and something else. Troy couldn't stop moving his hands. He kept clasping them together and pulling them apart again, as if he couldn't find a place for the nervous energy inside him. Celeste stood on my other side, closer to me than her brothers, a white handkerchief pressed gently against her eyes. She wasn't performing grief. At least that's what I thought then. Looking back now, that's one of the things I think about most, because Celeste was crying. But she was also the only person there who seemed completely present. The coffin lowered slowly into the ground. The quartet played. The wind moved through the trees. And for one brief moment, everything felt exactly the way a funeral is supposed to feel. Final. Then my phone buzzed. The message was still on the screen. "The man in the coffin isn't me." I looked at the casket, then at my children, then back at the screen. 5 words. That was all it took. 5 words to turn a funeral into a question. The strange thing is that I didn't panic. People always assume they know how they'll react to shocking news. Most of the time they're wrong. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I didn't run from the graveside searching for answers. I placed the rose. I stepped back. I thanked people for coming. I shook hands. I listened to stories about my husband. I accepted condolences. I did everything a widow is supposed to do. The entire time, those 5 words sat quietly in the back of my mind, because once the shock passed, another thought arrived, a far more troubling one. If Raymond was alive, someone knew. Not me, someone else. Someone had known enough to help stage a death, organize a disappearance, and keep it hidden from the woman who had shared his life for 35 years. That thought stayed with me through the rest of the service. It followed me as guests gathered in small groups around the cemetery. It followed me as people told me what Raymond had meant to them. It followed me as I stood beside the grave, pretending my world hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. And the more I thought about it, and the harder it became to ignore the people standing closest to that grave. Marcus, Damon, Troy, Celeste. I wasn't accusing anyone, not yet. But for the first time in my life, I found myself looking at my children and wondering what I didn't know about them. I still remember my exact thought. Not, is Raymond really alive? Not, where is he? Not even, why would he do this? It was something much simpler. Don't let your face change. Not here, not now, not in front of them. So I didn't. I stayed until the last guest left. I smiled when it was expected. I thanked people for their kindness. And when it was finally over, I drove home carrying a secret no one else knew I had. Because by then, I was certain of one thing. Someone knew Raymond Hargrove was alive. And whoever it was, they had made very sure I didn't.
Before we go any further into the story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you have not already, please subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, back to a gray October morning and the 5 words that broke open Diane Hargrove's whole life. To understand what happened the morning of Raymond Hargrove's funeral, you have to hold 3 questions in your mind at the same time. The first question is this: why would a man who was alive arrange his own funeral, instruct only the 2 people he most trusted, and then send his grieving wife a text from a number she believed belonged to a dead man? The second question is harder. Who, inside the Hargrove family, a family of 5 adults who had known each other their whole lives, had wanted Raymond Hargrove dead badly enough to make a plan and follow through with it? And the third question is the one that would keep Diane awake in her kitchen at 2 and 3 in the morning for the weeks to come. Why did every single thread of the truth, no matter which direction she pulled it, keep leading back to the one person in that family that nobody, not Raymond, not Diane, not the 3 sons standing at the graveside in their black suits nobody suspected? Diane still tells the story this way, slowly, when she tells it at all. He did not fake his death because he was afraid of dying. He faked it because someone he loved had tried to arrange it for him, and he needed to look that person in the face before he made his move. What he found was not what he was expecting, and what I found, in the weeks that followed, was not a murder investigation. It was a broken heart in a 7-year-old frame, wearing the face of the most composed person in the room. Raymond Hargrove's grandfather sharecropped tobacco in South Carolina on land he would never own, for a family whose name was on every official document. Raymond's father drove the number 14 city bus for 31 years, the same route, in and out of the same depot, and raised his family in a row house on the east side of the city where the message delivered to every child without ever being said out loud was this: you can do better than this. Nobody will hand it to you. The only thing between where you are and where you want to be is how hard you are willing to work and how long you are willing to be patient. Raymond got that message before he could put it into words, and he never put it down. He put on his first suit at 22 years old, bought it second-hand from a consignment shop, had it altered by a tailor who charged him less than the going rate because the tailor saw something in his eyes that was worth investing in, and he walked into a bank meeting he had not been invited to. He had spent 3 weeks researching the branch manager's name, his background, his priorities. He walked in. He introduced himself. He left that meeting with a future. He was 28 when he closed on the first Hargrove property. He was 35 when he had 6 buildings. He was 45 when his name was on glass and steel and brick across this city. By 68, the heart condition that had put him in a wheelchair 18 months earlier was a fact he refused to dramatize. The wheelchair did not make him smaller in any room he entered. Raymond Hargrove decided what was a story about him and what was simply furniture, and he had decided long ago that he was always the man who saw farther than everyone else in the room. That was the story Raymond told about himself, year after year, for 4 decades. And like every story we tell about ourselves for long enough, it had become the one lens he could not see around. Diane has said since, of the early years of their marriage, I met Raymond when I was 26, and he was already talking about the first building with the certainty of a man who had decided something and was now simply working out the timeline. I found it thrilling. I also found it slightly terrifying. I have spent 35 years learning that those two feelings were never the contradiction I thought they were. Diane Hargrove was 59 years old, mixed race, with her mother white and her father black, and she had grown up in a household where the question of who she was supposed to be was something she had to settle inside herself before the world settled it for her. Her hair was black and white now in equal parts. She had never colored it. She had told Celeste one evening, years before any of this happened, the two of them alone in the kitchen after a holiday dinner, a woman who hides her age from herself has already given away the most important thing she owns, which is her own history. Diane did not know at the time that Celeste had written those words down. Celeste had tucked them into the spine of a book on her shelf. Diane would not find that note until everything was already over. She had been called a steady woman for most of her adult life, and she had always been slightly uncomfortable with the word. Steady made it sound like the absence of storms. Diane had never been without storms. She had simply learned over 35 years of marriage to Raymond that being steady was not the absence of feeling. It was the decision to feel things in private so that the people you were responsible for had somewhere solid to stand. She had raised 4 children through the full range of what children put their parents through. She had managed a household that operated like a small corporation. She had sat beside her husband through 35 years of boardroom dinners, business crises, and the kind of late-night arguments 2 strong-willed people fall into when they have been together long enough to know exactly where the other person's soft spots are. She had done all of it with a consistency that nobody had ever given speeches about, and she had never asked anyone to notice. She had loved Raymond. She still did. She still does. That is the part Diane herself, when she is willing to speak about it, will say plainly. The love did not stop. It changed shape. It got heavier than I had expected love could get, but it did not stop. That is what makes me the right person to tell you this story, and the hardest person to carry it. Marcus, the eldest, was 45 years old, and he had spent his whole adult life building his identity inside his father's radius. He had Raymond's instinct for reading a room. He had Raymond's ability to position himself closest to power. What Marcus did not have was Raymond's hunger, because Marcus had never been required to be hungry. The Hargrove name was always the floor under him. When his father named Celeste as his successor at the family dinner table 3 weeks before the funeral, Marcus did not say one word at family dinner for 7 days. He came, he sat, he performed his presence. He did not speak. Diane still remembers what she thought, watching him during those silent dinners. I thought I was watching my son process disappointment. I understand now that I was watching a man decide something. Damon was 42, the middle son, the one strangers liked best, and fastest. Damon had a gift that sounds simple but is rare. He could make the person he was talking to feel, within 2 minutes, like they were the most interesting person he had spoken to all week. It was genuine, once. It had been a long time since it was only genuine. His gambling problem had not been a secret to anyone in the family who was paying attention. Raymond had bailed him out twice. The second time, Raymond had sat him down in the home study, looked at him across the desk, and said quietly, "The next time you come to me with this, Damon, I will refer you to a financial counselor, and that will be the extent of my involvement." Damon had nodded. He had said, "I understand, Dad." 18 months later, the debts had reached a number Damon could not bring to Raymond a third time. And Damon understood there would be no help coming. Troy was the youngest, 38 years old, and the gentlest of the 3 sons. He was softer than Raymond had ever wanted his boys to be. He followed Marcus because Troy had learned early that the world rewards decisiveness, and he was not built for it. 4 years before any of this happened, near the Hargrove summer property, Troy had been driving home from a dinner where he had drunk more than he should have. A young man on a bicycle had come through an intersection. Troy had hit him. The young man survived. Troy had pulled the car over, called Marcus instead of 911, and the family attorney had handled the rest. The young man received a settlement. The matter was buried. Troy received a lesson, that night, in exactly what the Hargrove name could make disappear when it had to. What nobody knew, what Raymond did not know, what Marcus did not know, what Troy himself did not know, was that 2 years later, Celeste had been helping her father organize a box of papers in the home study, and the manila envelope had been right there. Every legal document, every settlement record, every signature. She had read every word slowly. She had put the envelope back exactly the way she had found it. She had never once mentioned what she knew. And then there was Celeste, the daughter, 41 years old, the second of the 4 Hargrove children. She had left for college at 18 and built her own life with the kind of intention and discipline that, from the outside, looked like independence. And it was independence, but it was also armor. She had her own boutique consulting firm by 37 clients, across 4 states, a reputation that needed no family name to introduce her. She had never asked her father for $1. She came to every family event. She said the right things. She helped clear the table. She left at exactly the right moment, so smoothly and naturally that her absence never left a gap in the room. Diane has said, looking back, she was so good at being exactly as present as the situation required, and no more, that none of us thought to look at what she was not showing us. Nobody noticed that in 7 years, my daughter had not brought one single person home to a family event. Nobody noticed that when the conversation turned to relationships, Celeste always gracefully, with the question about someone else, with the comment about work, redirected it. Nobody asked. I did not ask. That is one of the things I have to live with now. The last family dinner before the announcement was on a Sunday evening. Diane cooked herself, which she rarely did anymore. She made Raymond's mother's pot roast with the herb blend his mother had written on a card she had memorized 20 years ago. She set the table with the good china. She put yellow tulips in the center, her own choice, not Raymond's. She sat down at that table with her husband and her 4 children and told herself that whatever was about to happen, they were a family. A family was the thing that held. Raymond announced it between the main course and dessert in the calm, settled tone he used for everything he had already decided. "I've been thinking about this for some time," he said. "Celeste is the only one of my children who has demonstrated the discipline and the vision the company is going to need going forward. The transition will begin in 60 days. Marcus's face did not change. That was the most frightening part of it. Damon's voice came in immediately. faster than usual, the charm gone. Dad, with respect, can we sit down and walk through the reasoning here? Because Celeste is brilliant, of course she is, but the company is there. Our operational considerations. There are succession structures. There are... Raymond did not interrupt him. Raymond never interrupted. He waited for Damon to run out of breath. And then he said, quietly, "The decision is made, Damon. Thank you." Troy looked at Marcus and waited to be told what to feel. And Celeste looked at her father across the table. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said 3 words. Slowly, evenly, precisely. "Thank you, Dad." Diane reached forward and straightened the yellow tulips, because she always needed something to do with her hands when she was paying close attention. She looked at her daughter's face, and she saw something there she could not name. She knew it mattered. She filed it away. She did not understand it. She understands it now. "There is one word for what I saw on Celeste's face that night," Diane has said, "and I have had to live with it. The word was ready." To understand what Celeste Hargrove did, you have to understand who Daniel Reeves was, not who Raymond decided he was, not the verdict Raymond delivered without a trial. Who Daniel Reeves actually was, as a person, to the woman who loved him. Daniel Reeves was 31 years old when he met Celeste at a birthday dinner in a 3rd-floor apartment on the north side of the city. There were 11 people there. A kitchen table, homemade food, the kind of evening where nobody is performing anything because there is nothing at stake. He was white, working class, the son of a postal worker from Cincinnati. He had come to this city in his mid-20s because he had seen a job posting for a music theory instructor at a small community arts school, and the position had felt in the way that certain things feel like the right direction. He taught teenagers 5 days a week. He adjusted the tuition for families who could not cover the full cost, and he never made a point of it because Daniel Reeves believed quietly that a child's access to music should not be decided by what their parents made on a Friday afternoon. He was not the kind of man who announced what he believed in. He just lived it. Celeste had not been looking for anyone that night. She was 34, entirely self-sufficient, and she had made a private agreement with herself years before that she was done spending energy on men who treated her career as a credential instead of as a picture of who she was. She was fine alone. She had built something meaningful. She was not lonely in the way people assumed women her age must be lonely. She sat across from Daniel Reeves at that kitchen table, and he made her laugh 3 times. Not politely, not socially, really. The kind of laugh that catches you off guard. The kind you feel a little embarrassed about because it was too honest for the room. At the end of the evening, when people were moving toward coats and goodbyes, he asked her about her consulting firm. Not as a networking gesture, not as a polite pivot. He asked because he had been listening to her all night and he wanted to know more. She drove home that night. She stood in her kitchen with her coat still on and her keys still in her hand. And, much later, she would tell her mother what she had thought in that moment, standing in her own kitchen. "Well, that was not what I was expecting." They dated for 12 months. She kept it quiet on purpose, not because she was ashamed of him, but because she was 34 years old and she knew her father, and she wanted to have this one real thing before Raymond's opinion arrived and changed the temperature of everything. 12 months. She would tell Diane, much later, in a kitchen at 1 a.m. that came at the end of everything. "That year was the best year of my adult life, Mom. I mean that exactly. I mean it the way I will never mean anything else." Diane has said since, very simply, "I believe her. I believe her, without reservation." Raymond found out the way Raymond found out everything. Through the information network he had built over 4 decades, through people who wanted access to him and understood that access was maintained through usefulness. He learned his daughter was seeing someone. He made inquiries. The portrait that came back was of a white working-class music teacher with no professional standing in any room Raymond moved through. Raymond called Celeste into his home office, not the kitchen, not the dining room, the office. With the $12,000 desk and the bookshelves full of books he had actually read, he looked at his daughter across that desk, and he said, slowly, "A dying man holds on to the strongest thing in his reach, Celeste. He doesn't call that love, he calls it luck. And I did not build this family so that you could become someone's luck." And she did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She looked at her father for a long moment, and, after a long silence, she said, "Okay, Dad." Just that. She walked out of his office. She got into her car. She drove 2 blocks to a parking lot. She sat with both hands on the steering wheel for 45 minutes. She did not make a sound. Then she drove home. She went to bed. She got up the next morning. She went to work. Raymond then called Daniel directly. Diane does not know what was said in that call. She knows it happened. She knows what it accomplished. Celeste told her much later, and Diane has never repeated the specifics of what her husband said to that young man on that phone to any other living soul. What she will say is this: Raymond Hargrove understood leverage. He understood exactly what Daniel valued. And he used that knowledge to make the cost of continuing to love my daughter higher than Daniel could justify paying. The school, the students, the families who had trusted that school with their children, all of that became part of the arithmetic of that phone call. And Daniel was the kind of man who thought about people other than himself. Daniel went quiet. He stayed away. And Celeste, not knowing about the phone call, spent months interpreting his silence as his decision, as confirmation of a fear she had never entirely put down that her father had been right. That, given an easy way out, Daniel had taken it. That wound, the wound of believing she had been wrong about him, sat on top of the wound of losing him, and she carried both of them in complete silence. The cancer was already in Daniel's body before Raymond made his call. It moved fast. Over 6 months, he went from managing to critical. Celeste tried to reach him. She went to his apartment building twice. She sent messages. Raymond's interference was never violent. That was not his way, but it was thorough, and every path she tried had a closed door at the end of it. She would find out later, in pieces she assembled over years, exactly how it had been arranged. She was in a work meeting on a Thursday afternoon when the phone call came. A client presentation, Midtown conference room, a meeting she ran 15 times a month without breaking a sweat. Her phone vibrated on the table beside her notes. She did not recognize the number. She let it go to voicemail. The meeting ran 22 more minutes. She picked up the message in the elevator on the way down. It was a nurse. A very kind-voiced nurse at a hospital whose name Celeste did not immediately recognize, calling because Daniel had listed her as an emergency contact, and there had been no other way to reach her. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry to leave this on a voicemail," the nurse said, slowly. It was late. He passed about an hour ago. He was holding a photograph at the end. "I just wanted you to know. I am so sorry." Celeste stood in the lobby of that office building. She thanked the nurse. She has said since that she does not know why she remembers thanking her, but she remembers it clearly. She hung up. She walked out through the revolving door. She sat down on a bench outside the building. She stared at the street. After a long time, she went back upstairs. The cleaning staff was running the vacuum around the conference room. She sat down at the same table. She did not move. Eventually, a custodian, a middle-aged woman with a kind face, stopped in the doorway and said, gently, "Miss, we're done in here, sweetheart, if you need to lock up." Celeste thanked her too. She was very polite that night. She drove home. She did not eat. She went to sleep. She cried once the following Sunday, in the shower, where no sound carries through the walls. And then she got up, got dressed, and went back to work. Because there was nothing else to do, and she had too much of her father in her to let the wound show. She started keeping notes, not a journal. Celeste was never the kind of woman who processed things on paper for the sake of processing them. Just observations, small ones, things people said that mattered, things she noticed that other people missed. She kept them on her phone under a name that meant nothing to anyone who might look project planning. She did not know, at the time, that she was building anything. She thought she was being careful. Diane has said of the note she found years later, tucked into the spine of a book on Celeste's shelf. It was one line in her handwriting. It said, "A man who mistakes silence for submission has already given you everything you need." I read it. I put it back. I thought it was a business principle. I understand now what it was. I wish I did not. 7 years later, Raymond Hargrove called his daughter back to that dining room table and offered her the company he had built from nothing, with the face of a man who believed he was finally, at great cost to himself, doing the right thing. He looked at her the way a person looks at someone they have decided they are honoring, as though a company were the shape an apology takes when you have never learned to give one in any other form. Diane still remembers Celeste's face in that moment. I read it as gratitude, she has said, slowly. I read it very differently now. What Celeste Hargrove did in the 6 weeks before Raymond's death was not impulsive. There is nothing impulsive in this story, not from her. What she did was the opposite of impulsive. It was the result of 7 years of attention, 7 years of being the quiet one in every room, 7 years of being so reliably composed and so reliably present in the exact amount and no more, that the people around her had stopped factoring in the possibility that she was paying very close attention to everything. She had not collected what she knew with any specific outcome in mind. She had collected it the way you collect things when you have grown up in a house where information and power are the same currency, quietly, carefully, without announcement. She had not planned a strike. She had simply maintained the knowledge the way you maintain a tool that you hope never to use, but that you make sure, when the day comes, is in working order. The day came 6 weeks before the funeral. Celeste arrived at the family house early for Sunday dinner. The entryway was quiet. The door to the den was pulled most of the way closed. Her brothers had not heard her come in. She heard Marcus's voice first, low, tight, the voice he used when he was trying to sound measured about something that had already moved past measured. "If he actually does this," Marcus said, "if he hands the company to her, we are finished. I am not talking about being passed over, Damon. I am talking about done." Damon's voice came next, quieter. There are ways to accelerate a situation like his. A pause. Then Troy, in the smallest version of his voice. "Somebody is going to have to actually say it out loud then." Nobody said it. The silence in that den set it in their place. Celeste stood in the hallway for 4 more minutes. She did not move. She did not, in those 4 minutes, make a decision. She walked, slowly, to the kitchen. She poured a glass of water. She was standing at the counter with the glass in her hand, perfectly composed when her brothers came through the doorway. She looked up. She smiled. "I wasn't sure all 3 of you were coming tonight," she said gently. None of them knew she had been in that hallway. The things Celeste knew about her brothers were not secrets she had gone hunting for. They were things she had been in the right place at the right time to observe. Marcus's affair, she had seen him through a restaurant window one Wednesday evening at a corner table with a woman she knew by reputation, the wife of his business partner. She had documented what she saw. Damon's debts, she had seen the financial statements 3 years earlier, when Raymond had sent her to the home safe to retrieve a different document. She had photographed every page before putting the folder back. Troy's hit and run, she had read the manila envelope 2 years before, when she had helped Raymond organize the box of papers. She had read every word. She had said nothing. Over the 3 weeks that followed the night in the hallway, Celeste had one private conversation with each of her brothers. With Marcus, she met for coffee on a Tuesday morning at a place where neither of them was likely to be recognized. She sat across from him. She let the silence settle, and then, slowly, she said, "Marcus, I love you. I want you to hear that first." Marcus had looked at her, wary. "What is this, Celeste?" "I am worried about you," she said quietly, "about some things in your personal life that could become public at a sensitive time." His face changed, not by much, but she was watching for it, and she saw it. What exactly are you saying to me? I'm saying I know it's been a hard couple of weeks. I know the announcement hit you harder than the others. She paused. Whatever the three of you decide to do about the situation with Dad, I am not going to be in the way. I want you to hear me clearly. I am not standing between you and what you decide. Marcus stared at her across that table for a long time. What are you actually telling me, Celeste? She smiled, slowly, warmly. I'm telling you I trust you, Marcus. I always have. That is all. She left before he could press her further. She put a 20 on the table. She did not look back. With Damon, it was over dinner 2 evenings later. Damon was always more comfortable with warmth than with precision, so she gave him warmth. She mentioned his situation without naming it. She said she hoped things were easing up financially. She said she knew Dad had been difficult about it, and that he had not been wrong, exactly, but had not been kind either. She said she was not going to tell anyone what she knew. And then, near the end of the meal, she reached across the table and put her hand over his hand. Whatever the three of you decide to do, Damon, I am not going to be in the way. That is all I came here to say. Damon looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his face that was not quite gratitude and not quite surprise. He whispered, after a long silence, "Thank you, Celeste." She squeezed his hand. She did not say anything back. With Troy, she was simplest of all. She sat with him at her own kitchen table. She poured him coffee. She held his hand briefly across the table because Troy had always needed to feel held. "Troy, look at me." He looked up. His eyes were already glassy. "I am thinking about you. I know you are carrying a lot. I want you to know whatever happens with Dad, however it happens, I am not watching you, sweetheart. I am not looking in your direction, I promise." Troy's hands started shaking. He whispered, after a long silence, "You're the best of us. You know that?" She squeezed his hand. She said nothing. She never said the word kill. She never said the words, "I want him gone." She never said anything that was not, word for word, technically and demonstrably true. She simply opened every door that her brother's fear and greed and desperation needed to walk through, and then she stepped to the side, slowly, and she waited. Diane has said, of what her daughter did, "I do not have a word for it. I have tried every category I know, manipulation, orchestration, revenge, grief, and none of them fits the whole shape of it. I have stopped trying to name it. I just carry it." The boys settled on a medical incident, because a medical incident was the most plausible thing available to them. Raymond's heart condition was real, documented, and the people who knew him had been quietly preparing themselves for the day his body decided it was finished. They paid a substitute nurse, in cash, through a third party, to adjust Raymond's evening heart medication on a night when his regular caregiver had the evening off. The dosage was calculated to look natural. It should have been undetectable. It was not, because of Dr. Elaine Booker. Dr. Booker had been Raymond's private physician for 11 years. She had developed the habit, over that time, of stopping by unannounced because Raymond was exactly the kind of patient who would not report a symptom unless someone walked into the room and asked him directly. She was 2 miles away that evening. She decided, on instinct, to stop in. She went to check his evening medications, as she always did when she visited. The numbers in front of her did not match the chart in her hand. She corrected the dosage, slowly, looking at the bottle, then at Raymond, then at the bottle again. She looked up. Raymond was watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face in 11 years of treating him.
Don't say anything to anyone,
Don't say anything to anyone, Elaine,
Just sit down.
He said quietly. Not yet. Just sit down. She sat. He picked up the phone. He called Leonard Graves. Leonard Graves had been Raymond Hargrove's attorney for 22 years. He was not simply a lawyer in Raymond's life. He was the man Raymond called when something needed to be handled correctly and without residue. When Raymond told Leonard what had almost happened that evening, what would have happened if Dr. Booker had not followed her own instinct and then told Leonard what he needed. Leonard sat on the other end of the phone in silence for a long moment. Then he said, slowly, "Raymond, You understand what you are asking me to arrange. Raymond said, I understand exactly what I am asking you to arrange. There was a pause. Then Leonard said, And Diane? Another pause, longer this time. Raymond said, very quietly, Nobody else, Leonard, just the two of you. Leonard would tell Diane, much later, sitting across from her in his office, months after everything was over, that leaving her out of it was the part of Raymond's plan he most questioned. He was a man who understood every move on every board he played on, Diane has said, of what Leonard told her, and he made the wrong call on the one move that mattered most to me. Raymond had his reasoning, and his reasoning was airtight in the way Raymond's reasoning was always airtight, which did not necessarily mean it was right, only that it was sealed. If Diane knew, Diane would grieve incorrectly. Her sorrow would not be raw enough, not rough enough, not unrehearsed enough. Whoever had tried to kill him would notice. And noticing would cost him the one advantage he had left, the advantage of being underestimated by a dead man. The death certificate stated, cardiac event, sudden, consistent with his medical history, uncontestable. Dr. Booker signed it. Leonard handled the documentation. The funeral was arranged to be genuine in every external way: the ceremony, the flowers, the burial plot, the sealed mahogany casket. What was inside that casket is one of the few questions Diane has never asked her husband directly. She has decided not to know completely. Raymond also arranged, with Leonard, for his phone to be accessible at the graveside at the exact moment of maximum impact. He needed Diane to receive the text in that moment, not before. Not in the car, not in private at home, at the graveside, in front of all four of her children. So her reaction would be unrehearsed, so her face would be real, so whoever had wanted him dead would see her in that moment and believe, completely, that she had not known. Diane has said of this, even now, several years on, I understand the strategy of it. Understanding the strategy of it and forgiving him for using my grief as an instrument are two very different things. I am further along with the first than I am with the second. Diane organized the entire funeral herself. She called each of her children the morning the news broke, and she still remembers every one of those calls with a clarity that is almost physical. Celeste picked up on the second ring. There was one long second of silence on her end. Then she said, slowly, I am coming right now, Mom. Do not move. I am coming right now. She was at the house within the hour. She walked into the kitchen. She did not say anything immediately. She just pulled her mother into her arms. And she pressed her hand slowly and repeatedly down the center of Diane's back, the way Diane used to do for her, when she was small and frightened, and she whispered into her mother's hair, I've got you, I've got you, I've got you. Diane wept into her daughter's shoulder for a long time. Celeste did not flinch. She did not let go. I will never forget the way it felt to be held by her in that moment, Diane has said. And I will not pretend, now that I know the truth, that the feeling has gone away. It has not gone away. That is part of what I have to live with. Marcus, when Diane called him, cried, hard. The kind of crying men like Marcus only allow themselves when they have decided no one will ever know it happened. He sobbed into the phone for almost a full minute. Mom, I'm so sorry. Come home, baby, Diane said gently. Just come home. Damon picked up on the fourth ring. How? When did it happen? And then, within 90 seconds by the clock on Diane's kitchen wall, he asked about the will. Diane registered this. She said nothing. She filed it in the place inside herself where she kept things until she understood what to do with them. Troy went so silent on the other end of the line that she had to say his name 3 times before he answered. She interpreted it as shock at the time. I know now, Diane has said, that what I was hearing in my youngest son's silence that morning was something much heavier than shock. The funeral was on a gray October morning. Diane stood at the edge of the grave with 35 years of marriage compressed into the effort it took to stand upright. She got through it because she had always gotten through things. And then she drove herself home, slowly, and she sat down in her own kitchen, and she read those 5 words on the screen of her phone one more time. The man in the coffin isn't me. She sat with that screen for a long time. Then, after a long silence, she set the phone face down on the table. All right then, she thought to herself in that moment. All right, who in this house knew? She did not call the number back that night. She did not call it the following morning. Whatever Raymond was doing, and she did not know yet. She was piecing it together from almost nothing she understood, with the instinct of a woman who had spent 35 years in the room with one of the most strategic minds in the city, that calling back was a move that could only help the wrong person. Right now, her only advantage was that she had received the text, and her children did not know she had. She kept that advantage. She went to the kitchen, the room where she had made every difficult decision in her marriage, where the light was warm even at midnight, where the quiet was the kind of quiet she could think inside of. She sat down at the table with a plain piece of paper and a blue pen, and she wrote 4 names. Marcus, Damon, Troy, Celeste. She stared at those 4 names for a long time. Then, slowly, she drew a line through Celeste's name. She sat with the crossed-out name. Something moved through her that she did not want to look at directly. Then she picked up the pen again, and she uncrossed her daughter's name. She did not like doing it. She did it anyway. I have not raised 4 children, Diane has said since, without learning that the most dangerous lie any parent can tell themselves is the one that begins with "my child would never." Diane watched her sons in the days after the funeral. Marcus was giving press interviews, 2 of them, within the first week. He spoke to the local business press about the Hargrove legacy. He said the word stewardship twice. He said the word legacy 4 times in the first interview alone. He looked at the cameras with composed, grief-touched authority. To anyone who did not know Marcus the way his mother knew Marcus, he sounded like a devoted heir. To Diane, he sounded like a man who had been preparing this language for longer than a week. Damon was checking his phone the way a person checks their phone when they are managing an active situation, not the distracted, habitual checking of a grieving man looking for distraction. The focused, intermittent checking of someone waiting for specific news from a specific person. Troy was not sleeping. Diane knew it because she called him every other day, the way she always did, and she could hear it in the texture of his voice at every hour. He took 11 seconds to answer her calls, every time. I counted, Diane has said. My youngest son answers in 3 seconds when life is ordinary. He took 11 seconds every single time. That is the kind of detail a mother learns to notice. Raymond had left documents for her in the private drawer of the home study. He had labeled the folders. He had written notes in his own handwriting explaining certain account movements, flagging certain financial patterns. He had known she would go to that drawer. He had prepared her a partial map. She went through every page over 2 evenings at the kitchen table with her reading glasses and a legal pad, building her own picture beside his. She called Marcus to the house on a Thursday afternoon. She put 2 documents on the kitchen table between them. Not the most damaging ones, not yet. Just enough. Marcus, I found these in your father's papers. I do not understand them. I need you to walk me through them. He sat down. He looked at the documents. And then he was completely still for 12 seconds. I counted those too, Diane has said. When he spoke, his voice was lower than she had ever heard it. Mom, there's something I have to tell you.
There was a
Tell
plan,
me, baby.
Mom. It was the
There
3
was
of
a
us.
plan. Before
I am so sorry.
Dad's heart, there was a plan. She did not move. She did not change her expression. She said, gently, tell me what kind of plan, Marcus. He could not look at her. It was the 3 of us. Me, Damon, Troy. We made a decision. We thought we were going to lose everything. We thought Celeste was going to... His voice broke. Mom, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. She let him cry. She let the silence sit. Then, after a long silence, she said, slowly, Marcus, just the 3 of you? Just the 3 of us? Nobody else? Nobody else, Mom. I swear, nobody else was involved. She let the silence sit again. He filled it. Nobody else, Mom. It was just the 3 of us. Just us. The 4th time he said it, unprompted, she stopped believing him. I have known my son since the night he was born, Diane has said. of that conversation. I know the way Marcus repeats himself when he is trying to be believed. The repetition is not emphasis. It is load-bearing. He needed me to believe it, which meant some part of him already knew it was not the whole truth, and he was trying to settle the truth with the force of his own voice. She let him leave. She said warmly, "Thank you for being honest with me, baby. Come here, let me hug you." She held her eldest son in her kitchen for a long minute. She felt his shoulders shake. She told him she loved him. She meant it. Even then, when the door closed behind him, she sat back down at the table. She wrote 2 words on the legal pad next to Marcus's name. "He's covering." She went back to the private study the following afternoon. Behind the financial documents Raymond had prepared for her, tucked against the very back of the drawer, there was a folder with no label. She opened it. Legal correspondence from an attorney whose name she had never heard Raymond mention. A name she did not recognize. Daniel Reeves. Letters that, reading carefully, she could see had been intercepted. A restraining order application, drafted and paid for, never filed. An obituary clipping from a small community paper dated March of the year her daughter changed. A photograph of a young man, brown hair, kind face. Diane did not know him. She looked at his face for a long time because she wanted to know him. And at the bottom of the folder, on a piece of Raymond's heavy cream personal stationery, her husband's handwriting. 7 words, across 2 lines. "She'll get over it. She has to." She sat with that piece of paper for a long time. She sat with it until the room had gotten dark around her and she realized she had not turned the light on. She said something out loud. "I am not a woman who talks to empty rooms," she has said. "I said it anyway." "Raymond, what did you do?" It was not a question. It was the sound of a woman who had just understood something she could not undo the understanding of. She picked up her keys. She drove to her daughter's house. She did not call ahead. "I have thought about it many times since," Diane has said, slowly. "Whether Celeste knew I was coming, I believe now that my daughter had been waiting for that knock for 7 years." Celeste opened the door before Diane reached the top step. She was in a loose gray sweater, bare feet, her natural hair pulled back in a clip, a mug of tea in her right hand. There was no surprise in her face. There was a readiness, the readiness of someone who has been standing near the edge of a confession for a long time and has simply been waiting to be asked. She stepped back from the doorway without saying anything. Diane walked in. The house was warm and very quiet. It smelled like chamomile and something faintly sweet from baking earlier in the day. In some trick of sense memory Diane has never been able to explain, underneath those things, it smelled like the chamomile tea she used to make Celeste as a teenager when her daughter could not sleep. They sat in the kitchen, not the living room, not the formal front room. The kitchen, which was Celeste's equivalent of the same room Diane always came back to when things were real. Diane set her bag on the floor. She set her keys on the table. She looked at her daughter across 2 feet of oak, and she said it. "Tell me about Daniel Reeves." Celeste set her mug down. She was quiet for 30 seconds. Then she looked up, and her eyes were very clear, and she said, slowly, "How much did you find, Mom?" "Enough to drive here without calling first." She nodded once, slowly. The way you nod when you have been expecting an answer, and the answer is the one you expected. She started talking. She talked about Daniel without crying, not because the feeling was not there. Diane could see the feeling. She could see it in the slight tension around Celeste's jaw, in the way she held the mug with both hands like an anchor. Celeste was not past the grief. She had simply lived alongside it for so long that she had learned to speak through it, the way you learn to walk on an old injury. She told her mother about the birthday dinner, the 11 people, the kitchen table, the way Daniel had made her laugh 3 times in the way that catches you off guard. "He listened, Mom," she whispered. "That sounds so simple, but he listened to everything I said, and he carried it forward. He asked about things weeks later that I had already forgotten," I told him. "I didn't realize how unfamiliar that felt until somebody was doing it. I didn't realize I had stopped expecting it from anyone." She paused. She turned the mug slowly in her hands. "That year was the best year of my adult life, Mom. I know that sounds like something people say. I mean it exactly. She talked about her father's call. She did not look away from her mother's face when she did, and it cost her something visible, the slight tension across her shoulders, the careful breathing she was doing between sentences. He told me a dying man holds on to the strongest thing he can find, she said slowly. He said it like a lesson, like he was explaining the world to me, and I was the one who needed the explanation. She stopped. She breathed. I said, "Okay, Dad." I went to my car. I drove 2 blocks. I sat in a parking lot for 45 minutes, and I told myself that was just how things worked. You accept the decision that has been made for you. You keep going, because that was the model in this family. She talked about the months of silence after that, about trying to reach Daniel, about the closed doors, about the gradual, terrible process of deciding that Daniel had simply chosen the easier path and what that had done to her, and how she had carried that wrong belief for months before the full picture finally came together. "I thought he left me, Mom," she whispered. "I thought he did the math and decided I wasn't worth the complication. I lived with that for months. I worked 12-hour days so I would not have to sit still with it." Diane felt something move through her chest that was not grief, exactly, but adjacent to it. It was the feeling, she has said since, of understanding something about my own child's pain that I had not been there to witness, and could not now go back to. Celeste talked about the Thursday afternoon in the conference room, the voicemail in the elevator, the nurse's voice, thanking the nurse, sitting in the emptied conference room until the cleaning staff arrived at 7 o'clock, and then her voice changed, not louder, not harder, just different the way a river changes when the riverbed falls away under it. "I went back to work the next morning, Mom. I built my firm because building things was the only language I had left for what I felt. I have not dated anyone seriously in 7 years. Not because I did not want to, because I learned in the only way that lesson gets learned, which is by living through it, that love in its real form is not something I am willing to risk in a family where Dad believes he has the standing to review it and revoke it." Diane was crying. She had not decided to cry. Her hands were flat on the table and her back was straight, and the tears were moving down her face without her permission. Celeste looked at her mother, slowly, and her own eyes were dry, and she said quietly, "Don't cry for what I felt back then, Mom. That part is over. I am not in that room anymore." And then she talked about 3 weeks ago, about Raymond at the dinner table with the yellow tulips and the good china and the pot roast, naming her CEO as though he were giving her something she had been wanting. "He looked at me like I had been waiting for his blessing," she whispered. "Like all this time, what I wanted was his acknowledgement, his approval, his name handed down to me in a bigger form. He looked at me, Mom, like he had finally figured out what I needed." She set the mug down. She looked at her hands. "He never once considered that the only thing I ever actually wanted from him was the thing he threw away in a phone call I was not in the room for. He threw it away. And then 7 years later, he called me back to that table like nothing had happened, and he offered me the company like it was a gift." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Diane's hands were still flat on the table. Celeste looked up. "I didn't want him dead, Mom." Her voice was low and completely even. "I want you to hear that. I did not want my father to die. What I wanted was for him to know. To actually feel in his body, in that place where you feel the things you cannot undo, what it is like to have someone you love disappear before you are ready to let them go. To watch the door close and not be able to open it. To have all of your money and all of your power and not be able to change the one thing that actually matters." She paused. After a long silence, she went on. "The boys were angry, Mom. They were already there, already at that edge, already saying the things they were saying in that den. I did not give them an instruction. I never said anything that was not true. I just stopped protecting people from themselves, and I stepped back." Diane did not speak. There was no sentence available to her in that moment. No response. No piece of 35 years of mothering and loving and witnessing this woman that had prepared her with the right words. "I thought about the stationery," Diane has said. "She'll get over it. She has to. I thought about every holiday table for 7 years. My daughter setting her fork down so carefully, smiling so precisely, leaving at exactly the right moment, year after year, carrying this inside her in complete silence. I thought about a photograph I had never seen in the hands of a man I had never met. I was still in the middle of all of that, still trying to find the sentence that would be the right answer, when the kitchen door from the hallway opened. Raymond Hargrove came through that doorway in his wheelchair at the speed of a man who has been listening on the other side of a wall to something he cannot unknow, and is now inside the room where it was said. He was wearing a dark sweater. His expression was the expression of a man who had, perhaps for the first time in a very long life of being certain about things, understood that being certain is not the same thing as being correct. He had followed Diane to the house. He had let himself in with the key he still carried. He had been in the hallway behind the kitchen door long enough to hear everything his daughter had said. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at Celeste. He did not speak for a long moment. Nobody moved. The refrigerator hummed. Diane's hands were still flat on the table. Celeste was looking at her father with an expression Diane could not fully read. Not hatred, not relief, not surprise. Something more exhausted than any of those. The expression of a person looking at a fact she had been holding for a very long time, and discovering, in the moment of finally seeing the man who caused it, that the actual person standing in front of her was not exactly the shape of the figure she had been imagining for 7 years. Raymond said, slowly, "Celeste. Just her name. The way you say a name when you cannot find anything else. And you need to begin somewhere." Then he said, "I am sorry." He said it the way people say things they have never practiced. Without the smoothing that comes from rehearsal. Without the calibration of a man who always knows how his words will land. It came out raw. Insufficient. The way a first real apology always sounds insufficient, Diane has said. Because an apology is only real when it has not figured out yet how to be graceful. Celeste looked at her father for a long time. Diane held her breath without realizing she was holding it. Celeste's eyes were dry. Her hands were still. Then she spoke, quietly, the way she had spoken everything that night. "Keep your company, Daddy." The kitchen was very quiet. "Keep your money. Keep your name on those buildings. I built everything I have without any of it. And I would build it again the same way. And I do not need your sorry. Your sorry is for you. It is not mine to receive." She picked up her mug of tea. She took one slow sip. The way a person takes a sip when they are allowing themselves one moment of normal before the next thing. She put the mug in the sink, slowly. She walked to the closet at the end of the kitchen. She took out her coat. She picked up her keys from the hook by the door. She walked out of her own kitchen. She did not look at her father. She did not look at her mother. And she did not slam the door. She closed it the way she had been closing things for 7 years. Quietly, completely, without leaving a gap. That was the detail that stayed with me longest, Diane has said. Not the words, the door. The sons were arrested within 6 days. Leonard Graves had been building the legal case from the night Dr. Booker had saved Raymond's life. Every financial record, every phone log, every conversation that could be documented. The attempted murder charges were supported by evidence that left very little room for interpretation. Marcus's lawyers tried 3 different approaches over the next several months. None of them held. Damon reached a plea agreement early, which was characteristic of him. Damon had always understood when a situation was past the point where charm could rescue it. Troy told the truth from his first conversation with the prosecutor, not because he had been coached to, but because Troy had never been built to hold a lie for long. All 3 of them went to prison. Celeste was never charged. Every conversation she had with her brothers had been constructed with the precision of a woman who had spent 7 years thinking carefully about what she would and would not allow herself to say. Every word she had spoken was technically, legally, demonstrably true. She had incited nothing. She had instructed nothing. She had simply declined to protect people from the natural consequences of their own worst decisions. There was nothing prosecutable in any of it. The prosecutor who reviewed the case file said so plainly. Raymond did not name a new CEO. He ran Hargrove Enterprises himself, from his wheelchair, slower than before, quieter than before, for the next 2 years. He made one other significant decision in that period. He called the family attorney who had handled Troy's accident 4 years before, and he instructed him, slowly, to find the young man on the bicycle again. To do what should have been done correctly the first time. To make it right, not just financially. The attorney asked Raymond if he wanted to explain the timing. Raymond said no. He did not need to. He knew what had shifted. Celeste sent a card at Christmas, plain white, no printed sentiment inside, just her handwriting, in blue ink. Taking care of myself. Love. Diane put it on the refrigerator. It stayed there through the winter and into the spring, and it was still there the last time anyone looked. Diane still leaves a light on in the kitchen. Every night. Before she goes to bed, she turns off every other light in the house, and she leaves the kitchen light on. Not because she expects her daughter to walk through the door tonight. Not because she has convinced herself that the light will bring her home. She leaves it on, in her own words, because I think about a man named Daniel Reeves, who died at 11:43 on a Thursday evening in March, in a hospital room in this city, in a room where nobody arrived in time to sit with him. I think about a photograph in his hands. I think about a nurse's voice on a voicemail. I think about a young woman in a parking lot with both hands on a steering wheel, who did not make a sound. I think about what it means to be the light somebody should have had, and wasn't. And I think, if I were my daughter, if I had set my fork down carefully at 35 years of family tables, and said the right things, and left at the right moment, and carried something this heavy in complete silence for this long, I would not need my mother to understand every piece of it. I would not need explanation. I would not need absolution. I would not even need conversation. I would just need to know that somebody was leaving the light on. So I do. Every night. Without exception. I leave the light on. Raymond Hargrove faked his own death to find out which member of his family had wanted him gone. He found out. What he also found, listening from the hallway at 1 a.m. to his daughter's voice saying out loud everything she had carried in complete silence for 7 years, was something 40 years of building an empire had not prepared him to receive. The understanding that the most important thing he had ever had, he had destroyed without noticing he was doing it, and the person it had happened to had been right there in front of him every day since, setting her fork down carefully, smiling, saying the right things, never once giving him the satisfaction of knowing what he had cost her. Celeste Hargrove did not go to prison. She did not lose her company, or her reputation, or her independence. She did not ask for forgiveness, and she did not offer it. She simply left, quietly, completely, without leaving a gap in the door. And somehow, that is the part of this story that is the hardest to carry. Not the arrest of 3 sons, not the truth about the plan, not even Raymond's face in his daughter's kitchen doorway when he understood what he had done. The sound of a door closed quietly, by a woman who was finished. Diane has said it this way, when she has spoken about it at all. Tell me, was my daughter wrong? Did she cross a line that should not have been crossed? Or did my husband spend 40 years building an empire and miss the only thing inside it that was irreplaceable? Tell us in the comments. We read every comment on this channel, and this story deserves a conversation. New stories every single week right here on NovaDiary Fiction. If this one moved you, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so you are here for the next one, and share this with someone who needs to see it. This has been At My Billionaire Husband's Funeral. My phone buzzed. The man in the coffin isn't me. We will see you in the next one.